Well, I'm so excited to have you on, Beth, to talk about sexual reformation and history. I mean, you kind of did write the book about it. So thank you for coming to join this conversation series.
I am so happy to talk with you again. So this is great.
Yay. Well, speaking of your book, you open the making of biblical womanhood saying that Christian patriarchy mimics the patriarchy of the non-Christian
Mhm.
world. And I kind of opened my book showing that, like quoting from different early church fathers and Puritans and reformers, kind of revealing that, oh wow, their anthropology of man and woman isn't Christian. It's more Aristotelian, based on that metaphysic of man being superior to woman in nature and virtue and in wisdom. And it's devastating to see that. Some make the argument that, well, our language is better now, but woman gets upgraded, right, to being in the image of God. But the reason why there's this continuity of patriarchy of some form is because of natural law, natural
Mhm.
theology. So they see it as a good thing. Um, but you say that the very continuity of patriarchy should give us pause.
Yeah.
Why is that? And why even now is the church still letting the culture guide us in the way that we talk about this?
Yeah. This is such a striking, if you look at it from history, and this is what you did in the beginning of your book too, where you walked through some of this. It is so scary
Hmm.
how similar our arguments are about women
Yeah.
are with not only non-Christian sources, but
Hmm.
also um, thinkers throughout world history that are basing their ideas about women also not on Christian understandings.
Hmm.
And so on the one hand, the parallels are really, really scary.
Yeah.
You can think about that, Aristotle, as you mentioned, argued that women are deformed men, that
Right.
their bodies are inferior to men, and this everything about them is inferior.
Hmm.
His question about men is, what is man? But his
Hmm.
question about women is, what are women for?
Mm.
And that
It's
is a
revealing.
really revealing and dangerous idea, because if you think about it, that very question reveals that men are considered to not only be superior, but their very essence. I mean, this idea that they are able to think, this intellectual essence, even be closer to God, whereas
Yeah.
women are to be used.
Mm.
What is the purpose of a woman? A purpose of
Yeah.
a woman is to fulfill the procreation necessities of a man.
Right.
And if we think about today, and we think about how women are still so objectified,
Hmm.
we think about, I mean, we even think about the John MacArthur scandal. Another,
Hmm.
came out yesterday,
Yeah.
where the allegations of the woman who had been crying out against child abuse in her home and against an abusive husband and went unheard for so long. And
She was
we
shamed
think
over it
she was shamed over it. Yeah.
from the
And we think
pulpit.
that, and we think about, why does that happen? And it's because the way we treat women we treat them the same way Aristotle did. What are women for? And
Mm.
women are for the husband under the authority. I mean, this is so clear in what happened with John MacArthur, this
Yeah.
understanding that
It's dehumanizing.
it's dehumanizing. That
She's
is
less human.
exactly, yes. I mean, that is it. And so it is the language that is used today to talk about women in conservative churches is
Hmm.
so similar to this same language that we see from the Greco-Roman sources. We could even go beyond into other ancient sources talking about women.
Yeah.
And then all the way up through, I mean, I was even reading, I can't remember, last week or something, I was reading an essay on the early medieval church fathers. And I had forgotten about that in the 6th century, they had this whole debate about whether the word man, this androcentric word,
Right.
or actually the Hebrew word in the Old Testament, if it really applies to women too,
Oh,
or
wow.
if it is, I mean, it's really fascinating. And these debates that we see then are very similar to debates now. And
Yeah.
some of the conclusion of some of those folk was that women are not made in the image of God in the same way as men. Because there is something about their creation. And I think the way you put it, the ontology of women is less.
Yeah.
So,
It's sad too, because I mean, I think the church wants to be able to speak into things like the sexual reformation and uphold the dignity of women, on one hand, except for we're just being reactionary.
yes.
And when we're talking about reformation of history, we really need to go back and have actual reformation and going into God's word and getting to the beautiful vision and meaningfulness of God creating us as man and woman, and the gift that is, instead of just reacting to these arguments and picking up the same language as the culture.
Yeah. I have a hard time figuring out how people can't see this. It's
I
like,
know, right?
it's just like, the language is exactly the same. The arguments are so similar. And yet we argue that we are reading the Bible on its own terms. And we argue that we are reading it without the lens of culture. And yet,
we don't see the water that we're swimming in.
Yes, it's real. And I know you have the same experiences that I do. It's just very, part of me is somewhat amused by it, because I'm like, can y'all just
have to
not
laugh
see?
some, right.
Can you just not see?
Well, and the thing too is, like, as women, we very much experience the harm that this kind of thinking does for women. But, the history of patriarchy, it really harms the dignity and personhood of man too, not just woman. And so maybe we could talk a little bit about that, like how this damages the very story that our bodies are to tell about God's spousal love for our bride. And it not only damages woman, but the person and dignity of man as well.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think when we teach that there is something about women that makes them always have to be subjugated to men, then what we are also doing is we are teaching that men are ontologically a certain way as well, and that those men are in some ways separate. I mean, we think about Rousseau in the 17th century. I always go back to Rousseau because he just encapsulates a lot of this argument very much. And in his book, Emile, which is mostly about the education of a boy named Emile, but at the very end, he turns to the education of Sophie, who is to be Emile's wife. And in this, he makes it very clear that women and men are so different that they can't intellectually really relate at all. And so if you think about this idea of a companionship, and if we think about God's words in the beginning, where he says it is not good that Adam is alone. And yet, if we argue that there is something about women that makes them really not that companion, not that, not that you have to be married to be fully experiencing God. I don't want to make that argument at all. But even for people who aren't married, if we think about the world in which we live, where men and women, we function together. We work with each other. Our world works when we are working together. And if men walk into this with an idea of thinking that they really can't connect with women, that they really can't relate with women, that they can't even be friends with women. That was one of the books that you wrote, was why can't we be friends? This stems from this idea.
That was controversial.
I know. It stems. I just heard a story yesterday from a woman at a very, I was speaking at SMU yesterday, and I heard a story from a woman from, I won't name the church, but she was on staff there, and she had coffee with a friend. And the next day she was accused of adultery because her friend was a man. And they were like in a public place, had just run into each other, sat down and had a cup of coffee together. And she was accused of adultery.
Some dangerous stuff.
It's just crazy. This idea that you can't have this type of relationship that God created us for.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're saying you can only be friends with other men, that you can't have meaningful relationships with women, except for maybe a spouse, but that relationship, I mean, she still can't make decisions the way that you make decisions. Her life is supposed to be in different spheres. So you're not able to talk with her about, your public work, all of that stuff, because that's not part of her world.
Yeah.
What sort of life is that?
I know. I mean, it seems, not only lonely, but it kind of puts this hierarchy in play then, right? Where man kind of speaks for God. And
Yes.
and so he always needs to be managing the woman. And I just think of the insecurities that must cause too, to be missing out on that, the distinctness of the creator creature,
Yeah.
distinction there, that we're on the same level with
I
man,
know.
and that we don't have to put something on to be man or to put something on to be woman, that God has created us this way, that it's beautiful. We don't have
Mhm.
to exercise power over someone else to be, masculine or
Right.
feminine. It just seems like they're missing out then on the beauty of what masculinity tells, I think. In the story in the Bible, the whole meta narrative that we see Christ, the man, being the first to love, the first to sacrifice, and the first to
Right.
give. And he dignifies woman in his masculinity. And that's just such a beautiful thing.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, it's just what we are teaching about women is not just damaging to women, it's damaging to men too. And
Hmm.
I think this is one of the things that really became so stark to me in youth ministry, when I began
Mm.
to really think about the messages that we were giving these young boys,
Yeah.
and what we were teaching them and what we were training them to have to be. I mean, I worked with all sorts of different teenagers, and some of the boys probably are natural leaders, but
Hmm.
some of them weren't, and some of
Hmm.
them did not manifest what we would see as these ideals of masculinity, and they probably never would, but yet they were already feeling that pressure. I mean, I know that one
Yeah.
of the
Oh,
things that we worked with young boys was they were already feeling the body image pressure, and this
yes.
image, of trying to get like 6 packs when they're 12 years old, which is really kind of impossible for a young adolescent body,
Yeah.
and watching their weight and doing all of this stuff. And so, I mean, so we think about those with women,
Hmm.
but that's just as destructive for these young boys.
Yeah, they're struggling with the same thing, except for they're
Yeah,
struggling with it, even having to be more quiet about it, I think, right?
right,
Because
right.
it's not manly to share that you're struggling
Yeah,
with these things.
that's exactly right. And so they were, and yeah, no, I mean, we have this whole idea that they're not supposed to talk or share in the same way that women are, or they're
Hmm.
only supposed to do it with other men within this, what we, these discipleship relationships, which can be good,
Yeah,
but depends on how they're being framed, and it
right.
depends on what lessons you're giving.
Hmm.
So I don't know. I worry as much about the young boys as I do
Hmm.
about the young girls.
Yeah, I think, this makes me think about too how, so I come from more of a Reformed tradition. And so we have a lot of pride in the Reformation,
Yeah.
right? And the reformers, and from learning from these men. You, in your book, you kind of have a whole chapter on the Reformation.
Yeah.
Um, it was good. And you say that, we tend to glorify the way that we look at the past.
Yeah.
And we even re-narrate it in some ways, to tell the story the way that we like it. And there are so many treasures in the church throughout the different ages in the past that we want to take and pass down to the next generation. But how is it dangerous, and it's not even history really, to
Right.
keep that dirty bathwater in the tub with the baby for over
Yeah.
2,000 years.
I mean, on the one hand, this is sort of, I would say it's probably, natural inclination is we like to tell stories that make us look better. And we
Yeah.
like to tell stories about people who are like us. So if we think about the Reformation story, it's mostly what we know today was articulated in the 19th century by people by mostly men, who were trying to tell a particular story, There was a lot of anti-Catholicism in the 19th century in the story that they were telling as well. And so while there were certainly significant problems with the Catholic Church, there was much more magnification of some of those problems and a minimization of maybe some of the similar problems that were carried into the reformers and some of the challenges. And so the narrative that we got was sort of this triumphalist narrative. And this idea, of Protestantism, of triumphing over the evils of the Catholic Church, and mostly triumphing through these few men, Martin Luther, John Calvin, who we have really glorified in ways that I think they would probably be pretty appalled by how we have glorified them. And the story that we have told is mostly through that lens. Whereas, if you think about history today with the Reformation, most scholars, I use the word Reformation with an singular just because it's very popular, but really we talk about reformations, and we talk about these, changes that were going, that some of them, there was sort of a broad connection, but there are so many different waves of reformations in different areas. And different reasons why they took place, and different players in those reformations. And so, but that story is much more complicated. It includes a lot more voices. It also very clearly shows how excluded, like, for example, African theology. And if we think about the rise of the Reformation is at the same time that we have the rise of the slave trade, of really the high point of the slave trade. And so at the same time, we see Protestantism, the really glorification of Protestantism moving out, is the same time that we have the slave trade that is being run by these same, many of these same folk, not all of them. We also have the Catholic countries are very much involved in the slave trade as well. But we have these two parallel emphases where we get the Reformation story also gets tied up in imperialism and in the story of white superiority. And we don't like to untangle those threads. We want to keep only the good part, the part that we like, the part that makes us feel like we were on the winning side. And we react really negatively to folk who tell us that the story is bigger than that. You can think about the reactions to the 1619 Project, which have been just really vicious in some ways. But we don't like for people to mess with the stories that we have told about ourselves.
As you're saying all this, I'm just thinking about my son and daughters, and how I feel like the next generation, really is passionate about wanting to go into history and to look at the nuances. They feel kind of betrayed in the way that it's been taught in a lot of ways. And, I think again about how the church can get ahead of this. What does it hurt to be honest? You look in scripture and you think of how brutally honest scripture is about the state of God's people throughout history. There's some terrible stuff in there. God isn't harmed by it. It just magnifies his amazing grace and love, and it humbles us, right? And so, we want to keep that baby. And, I don't want to say, well, John Calvin said this about women, so therefore I don't want to learn anything from John Calvin. I don't want to value anything that he's passed down. But we can hold this together, these complexities, and talk about them. And I think that's just so important. And I do think that our children, the next generation in history, they value this. And then there's something that we can do here in reform and how we're telling stories.
Right. No, I think you're right. And I think in some ways the Christian church, we know this from the publishing industry, really lags behind even what the rest, the difference between what people in the church are taught about church history and what academia knows about church history, and even what more public education knows about church history is huge. And
It shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be. Mm-mm.
No. All right. So you say that, and I so resonated with this. You said in your book that complementarianism rewards women who
Yeah.
play by the rules. And boy, have I experienced that. And it connected me to something that Tiffany Bloom wrote in her book, Pray Tell.
Yes.
She says that women who enable other men to silence women who speak up and tell the truth, like women who participate in this are kind of a picture of patriarchy at its
Oh,
peak.
yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
here we are, though, standing, I think, where we are in history, with women gaining a voice through the publishing industry, through academia,
Yeah.
even in social
Social
media.
media.
We're really gaining a voice. And yet you and I both know that the cost is still pretty huge for women who don't play by the
Right.
complementarianism rules. So, I want to talk about maybe what is the cost, though, for history if we continue to play by the rules at such a
Right.
pivotal time.
So first of all, I have to say, until I read your book again, I had forgotten about the whole potato video, which is still just so insane. I mean, it's just so crazy.
I know. Right?
I think about that too with me, that, I think I've muted all the right people, that I'm not hearing any. I think finally I'm like free from all of that. But the last attack that I know for sure was made on me was the one where I was accused of child abandonment.
Oh, yes.
Which was so crazy.
Precious.
But again, I mean, it was similar to sort of the potato attack,
Yes.
on you, this idea that because we are speaking out, that it must mean that we are not the right kind of women. We are not doing, we are not women who care about our homes, who care about our families, who care about our children. We are not women who can cook. I remember I had a student once who told me that I brought cookies. I always bring stuff to my classes. And I had the student and he was like, "Did you make these?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "You don't look like a woman who can cook." And I was like, well, maybe let's talk about that a little bit. But nonetheless, it's these types of ideas that we have. And so, that when I wrote that phrase, complementarianism rewards women who play by the rules, this is a phrase that not only so many women resonate with, but women have been talking about this for a long time. I actually sort of adapted the phrase from a women's history seminar that I had years ago at Chapel Hill. And I remember us having this conversation. And instead of complementarianism, what we were talking about in that seminar was patriarchy, that patriarchy rewards women who play by the rules.
Yeah.
And with that conversation, we are having a conversation about what we call the patriarchal bargain. And this is also, it's a historical concept. It's a hard concept because, I mean, I was complicit in the patriarchal bargain for a long time.
Yeah.
But it's this, patriarchy benefits some women who conform to it.
Yes.
And so I think about the women, and some of this, we talk about in the historical context, some of this is women simply just trying to make the best life they can for them and their children. And so they do. So they become complicit in the system. They support the system because it's the best way to move forward with not only their welfare, but the welfare of their kids. And so we see a lot of this with the patriarchal bargain. We also, though, see a lot of women, and I think we've seen this very recently, women who have invested their entire identities in being in this patriarchal ideal.
Yes.
And their value is in it. And so if somebody comes along, if they were to step away from it, it would the personal impact on them, because their whole identity, their self-worth is wrapped up in this. And so it makes them fight back hard because, because I think the fear in that, but the thing I try to get across to students is that only some women get to benefit from this. Only the women who are on the higher rungs of this, me as a white woman from an upper middle class family who was able to go into education, I benefited from this. But women who don't have those social supports, who don't have those economic supports, who come, patriarchy is nothing but bad for
Mhm.
them. And by me continuing to maintain structures that keep women from not only being able to exercise their gifts, but being
Mhm.
able to move up economically,
Yeah.
I'm actually harming
Yes.
women in my world. And it's really hard, I think, because a lot of women, I mean, I remember being this. I mean, it hurts. You're like, wait, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm doing
Right.
what I think God is calling me to do.
Mhm.
And, and my question for them is, I think you are sincere, but have you
Yes.
thought about the logical outcome of maintaining these structures and what it does for other women?
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's so hard. Tiffany Bloom tells it so well in her
Yes,
very
she does.
personal account of the impact of this. I also
Mhm.
think that you and I have definitely felt the impact of women who have gone after us,
Yes.
because the whole potato video is very clear, this idea, which is,
Yes.
I don't know if I peel potatoes correctly,
I
but
use a knife, not a peeler. So,
I could
when
go toe to toe with other people on other things that I cook quite well. So I don't know, but it's just really bizarre. But at the same time, I
right.
understand women's identities are
Yes.
wrapped up in this.
Well, I want to wrap this up with quoting something from my friend Anna Anderson. I think it's something positive as we look at the history of woman, even in
Yeah.
scripture. And so I want to close quoting my friend Anna. She says, the prominence of the woman in scriptures
Yeah.
parallels the spirits. She's present and yet backgrounded. She's visible yet obscure. However, in the unfolding, she comes increasingly into view until she looms as large as day in Revelation. The bride is the final symbol of mankind. The woman is obscure in scripture, not because she is less, but because she is last. She is indicative of things to come, yet she's the treasure worth finding, as she represents what eye has not seen, what ear has not heard, neither has entered into the heart of man, the things that God has prepared for those who love him. I just wanted to end with beauty
Yeah.
there as we find it in God's word, and the typology of woman as, pointing us to Zion, heavenly realm, and the heavenly people, the bride of Christ. And just to thank you for coming in on
Oh
this
yeah.
conversation, Beth, and for you all who are listening. This is such a pivotal time in history. And I just want to invite you to that freedom and belonging that we do see in God's word.
I love that. Thank you.